Thank you very much. C. Randall Paul is founder and president of the Foundation for Interreligious Diplomacy and has lectured widely and written numerous articles on healthy methods for engaging differences in religions and ideologies. Paul is currently completing 2 books, Fighting About God, Why We Do It, and How to Do It Better, and a second book, Converting the Saints, An American Religious Conflict. He's on the board of editors for the International Journal of Decision Ethics. He's also had a professional career in commercial real estate, receiving the Phoenix Skyline Award for Excellence in Urban Development. Mr. Paul received an MBA from Harvard and a PhD from the University of Chicago. He and his wife, Jan, are the parents of 5 children. Became acquainted with Mr. Paul at the conference hosted by the Law School for International Religious Liberty, and very quickly learned of some of the very interesting work that his foundation is doing. I encourage you to take a look at their website if you're interested. Today he will be speaking on peaceful tension through respectful contestation between trustworthy opponents, a social psychological approach to diplomacy between religions. Please join me in welcoming C. Randall Paul.
Thank you. Those who really envy teachers came up with this line: those who can do, those who can't teach. I hear all the time in my line of work, those who have power do, those who don't do diplomacy. I'm here today to challenge that notion that power of heart-to-heart diplomacy is what we have left out of political and, for that matter, business diplomacy for all too long. Using the realpolitik model, we've forgotten that the hearts and minds of people really drive their bodies, and much of what I'll be saying today has to do with that. I want to say before I get into my spiel that we are attempting to establish a legitimate form of diplomacy between religious groups. There is no network in the world today that's the equivalent of political diplomacy between religious groups. The Roman Catholics are perhaps best at nibbling at the edge of doing dialogue with other religious groups. But to have good diplomacy, you need to have good diplomats. And diplomats have to be bilingual. And religious diplomats have to be religiously bilingual. There's the rub. Our foundation is all about converting people like you in this room, at least a few of you, to putting your lives into learning enough about another religion and another cultural experience of religion that you can gain the trust of another religious community. And another ironic way to do that is to be firmly grounded in your own orthodoxy. For the people that you'll be dealing with will see you in themselves when they see your commitment, when they see your willingness to go the distance for your faith. They will say, this guy, this gal will get me, because that's what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to go the distance. And the social psychological approach to interreligious diplomacy is to create a trust between individuals at the level of their integrity and commitment that has very little to do with their doctrinal differences. They need to engage those doctrinal differences. This game is not for wimps, but the whole approach that we'll be going at today is to gain the trust first of the integrity of the individual. Then you go into the difficult issues that are, as you'll, I hope, be persuaded today, irresolvable. And therefore we need a new model. Not peace, but peaceful tension is the game plan. Not buddies, but trustworthy opponents is the game plan. If we're fortunate enough in diplomacy to have friends, that's great. That's a plus. But if I were to get a heart attack right now, if you had these 2 ideas in your mind, says what Paul's talking about is changing our view of what the end game is between religions. It's not peace. It's cooperation every once in a while, if it makes sense. But the real situation between my customers, those who deeply believe in the exclusive truth of their claims, peaceful tension is what it's all about. Jesus said, love your enemies. They're so useful. And we'll find out how that works today. And I'd like you to be thinking in the back of your minds, do you have a trustworthy opponent? Are you a trustworthy opponent to somebody? Go back in your lives, back to kindergarten, up to present day. Think about that. Most people have a very difficult time with that. And that's one of the problems in the world today, is we don't have that as a normal way of thinking. I didn't say enemy. An enemy is someone who wants that which is bad for you, wants to destroy you, put you out of business. An opponent can, and often does, want your best game, wants the best out of you. And if he's a religious opponent of the trustworthy variety, they actually want to help you get to heaven, to help you rise to the highest. That they do that by trying to convince you you're dead wrong about your religion is a problem. But we will be talking more about that soon. Okay, I will now go into my prepared remarks. If you have thoughts, we'll have a few minutes at the end to have questions and answers, so do jot them down. I tend to ramble, so I'm going to actually use a written text. When the subject, I call this talk, Giving Peace a Fighting Chance. When the subject of how to achieve world peace comes up, I will often hear people state that the only way for this to come about is for religions to ignore their differences. And if they can't do that, they should at least be quiet about their exclusive claims, and especially stop trying to convince others that their way of believing and living is better than others. Those who suggest this believe that missionary work is a kind of cultural genocide. I'm here today to challenge all of these views. As president of the Foundation for Interreligious Diplomacy, I'm in the peace-building business. Yet, if I were to apply a pithy label to our work, it would be religious fight training. Not the virulent kind that goes on in hidden camps, but the kind that needs to be done in public and in religious schools throughout the world among people of all religions and ideologies. We have a common problem with social global warming that could destroy our lives sooner than the meltdown of ice caps. It is that people get angry when they sense they and their loved ones are in danger of losing their souls by being contaminated with false beliefs. Whether you're a Baptist worried about secularism or a secularist worried about theism, you don't want your children to cross over. You want to avoid family divisions on earth, if not loved ones burning in hell for eternity. We have to find a way to face this concern without resorting to social upheaval. As we are in a more and more interacting pluralistic world, this becomes obviously more and more a real situation. Religious diversity inevitably results in calling into question of others' truth claims, implicitly, if not overtly. To mitigate the inherent offensiveness of conflicting truth claims, interfaith efforts often declaim missionary work and focus on finding common ground and doing very useful humanitarian service. While we always applaud cooperative efforts to improve the lives of all people, I don't believe that religions should rein in their truth claims and seek compromise or consensus with each other. Given that we hold our deepest beliefs as a matter of integrity of conscience, I don't think it is possible to thrive as a whole, authentic person without expressing our beliefs in voice and in action, including those beliefs that others are wrong about their religion. To tell someone you do not want to know his or her truth is a disrespectful act. When it comes to religion or ideology, don't ask, don't tell makes for mechanical and shallow relationships. And I might add, ultimately, very resentful ones that lead to political violence. As a religious fight trainer, I'm here to argue that tension between people is important. It is healthy. It is an essential part of all life and can be a constructive, life-giving force. Healthy tension can improve relationships, while unhealthy stress can destroy them. So as a fight trainer, I emphasize that recognizing the usefulness of opposition in everything, that was for a Mormon group, is essential to understanding peace. An opponent does not need to be an enemy. It is often an honor and a blessing to find and engage a trustworthy opponent. As a religious fight trainer, I assert that with the proper conventions in place, we can improve our contests over different views of truth and correct way of living. We can engage opponents without dismissing or disdaining them, without escalating disagreement into coercive force or violence, or as 3rd Nephi would say, contention. John Lennon is famous for this lyric. All we are saying is give peace a chance, but we need to sing a more robust lyric. What we are saying is give peace a fighting chance. We don't need to end fights over religious worldviews, secular or humanist solutions to societal problems, or any claim or vision for the world that someone believes is the most important thing for everyone else to adopt. We need to do better with our fights over them, however, and especially those over religion. One way to do this is to engage our opponents with good faith as opposed to assuming bad faith on their part. I'll leave that for a minute if we have time, and I'll come back to that. I'm sympathetic with current approaches to religious and worldview engagement that emphasize the need for better communication and mutual understanding between people and groups. I'm also supportive of approaches that promote ways for religious groups to cooperate with each other in working to end poverty and disease and in achieving other important social goals. What I add to these peacemaking strategies, however, and what we work on in our foundation, and what makes us, I think, unusual, is we add the 3rd C to communication and cooperation, and we call that contestation. My observation, based on years of study of human behavior, I started here in social psychology at BYU back in 1970 is when I graduated, is that we who hold different worldviews and religious beliefs can come to live together in peaceful tension only when we all learn to communicate deeply, cooperate wisely, and contest respectfully. These 3 actions, combined with an attitude of mutual caring and transparency, will invigorate and build trust in any human relationship. Quick aside, John Gottman, the Gottman Institute up in Seattle, has finished about 20 years of research of marriage. He has thrown out the compatibility model and found time and time again that a model of respectful conflict is the way to have a good long-term marriage. He has proven that he can show a couple in their first therapy session. He can turn off the volume and watch their faces and body language and say, that one's going to make it, even though they're in a heated argument. That one's not going to make it, even though they're not. How does he do it? He's measured, literally, he started out, interestingly enough, as a mathematician. He measures what you'll call the contempt wrinkles. If you have contempt for your partner, no matter how politic, how polite you're being, it's going to end. If you have respect for your partner, no matter how intense you are in the discussion, it's going to last. This works so powerfully in interreligious conflict and interreligious dialogue. I can't tell you how we have replicated John's work in our work. Any successful diplomacy between religions must honor the constructive social power of religious disagreements when they are respectful expressions of care for others. When you respect and care for someone, that is much more important than what you say to them. They sense that about you. Future diplomats, remember, our motives matter most in all communication, and at the heart of much conflict over religion is a sincere attempt to persuade others for their own good about the rightness of a particular view or path of happiness and peace. And the only way that we can do this is to honor this ethic of caring. The only way we can honor this ethic of caring is by allowing a mutual challenge of differences in forthright and transparent dialogue. Dialogue needs to occur in a safe place and according to conventions that promote the development of the type of respect for an opponent that one's own sense of self that comes only through mutual sharing of personal experiences and strenuous contestation of differences. Indeed, the key to deep communication of the heart in a persuasive mode is to provide a safe haven for sharing our most sacred stories, even when doing so leaves us with questions that cannot be harmonized. I note up front that secularists also have their own sacred stories about how they came to their beliefs, and they need a safe haven for that expression. If I were to give you three things, if you want to be an interreligious diplomat over lunch with a family member that you're having very difficult times with friends at work, if you're in a political situation, three things. It's got to be over lunch, very human activity, anthropologically profound. You're both human. Okay? So, eat together first. Talk about all sorts of unimportant things which are extremely important to get it going. And then there's going to be an hour and a half lunch, okay? What's your sacred story? Not content, not the Joseph Smith story. Your story. How did you come to believe your profoundest and most compelling beliefs and commitments? You ask your partner that question. You lean back and take a nice ride, because when that happens and they take you as sincere, you're in for a trip where they take you into their background and open up their doors in a way that will amaze you usually. It usually takes at least 15 minutes to a half hour. Then you tell your story. Okay? Next step. So these are all mutual. Next step. What do you love most about your religion? What's the best about it? Why are you enthusiastic? Why do you sit through 3 hours every week? Okay? Whatever it is, share with each other why you love it so much, you're into it so much. Okay? Don't talk about my great-grandfather, John D. Lee, at the Mountain Meadows Massacre. That's not what you want to talk about. You want to talk about the best that we've done, the best that we've had to offer. Okay? And you want to listen to their best. The third, so you share what you love about your religion. Then the third area, you get to the contestation level. Where do we have problems? Where can I just not buy the fact that you don't think there is a God, you Zen Buddhist? Where do you get off thinking you're the only true church, you Mormon? Okay? Once you've done these, guess what? That comes down and flows out in a way that's incredible, because you've already honored that person by listening to their sacred story and seen them in you also. You've also seen why they love their religion so much, and they've allowed you to share the same. So then you can get down here to the more difficult stuff, having based this on truth, on the trust that you built there. Now, this can take a long time, more than one lunch. We're doing a dialogue down in January and February down in L.A. on theological foundations for your view on Prop 8 between two groups that is going to be, we're having to go to lunch twice before they come to the dialogue. But to give you an idea, this is the kind of thing we do all the time to get people into dialogue. So that's for you. That's a gift. You can use it any place in your life, and I'm serious. Especially if you're married, try it on your spouse. Blow you away. I should have done that 20 years earlier in my marriage. But that's another subject. How do I know Gottman? Think about it. All right. For many people, the first thought that comes to mind when they hear the word peace is an absence of tension, freedom from conflict, While the idea of a tensionless world is at first glance appealing, it's not realistic. For one thing, it runs counter to the basic dynamic of the universe, which is process, constant change, one moment giving way to another, and growth, which inevitably, or entropy, which inevitably implies a new thing taking place out of an old. Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl, who with Mother Teresa, I think, are kind of the best things that came out of the 20th century, writes, I consider it a dangerous misconception of mental hygiene to assume that what man needs in the first place is equilibrium, homeostasis, a tensionless state. What man needs is the striving and struggling for some goal worthy of him. Unquote. In making this statement, Frankl captures the wisdom and whatever peace is, it involves contentment in not being content. It fits with the famous insight into our deepest character as human beings that if we were given a choice, at least after perhaps a short respite from troubles, we would ultimately prefer being a human being who is somewhat unsatisfied than a mere animal who fully satisfied but who lives on a lesser level of complexity. So, maybe college freshmen, might take some issue with this, but as you get out of school, you'll start to agree with me. Something within us calls us to new and ever-evolving moreness. Tension is very useful. It is the opposing force that pushes us into all sorts of building experiences. You can think of, if you're engineers, you can think of a vaulted ceiling being, especially if you're thinking in religion, an apsis of a church. Think of the tension that's there. Think what's created by that wonderful tension. You have the structure, the form that allows you to enjoy the beauty and if it's a church, the worship in that space. The classic experience of healthy tension is embodied in a successful marriage. Spouses in a healthy marriage do not achieve ideal balance by surrendering their respective wills. They remain in a life-enriching struggle. If one spouse were to overwhelm the other, or were one or both to surrender their wills, tension would lessen, but this would not be peace. Rather, this is the death of love and the end of the marriage. In Bizet's opera, Carmen, the protagonist, says, Si je t'aime, prends garde à toi. If I love you, watch out. This is a warning of risk, but also an exciting invitation. Welcome me, she is saying, and be alert. Perhaps this is why Paul said in Hebrews, it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. And Jacob met the Lord as a wrestler. It is through their wrestling with differences that both partners in a marriage are blessed to become more than they could be alone. With patient integrity, they come to live in peaceful tension, loyal to each other and to the main issue of their wrestling match. I hope you like that pun. Emotionally healthy children. Upon such children, social science confirms healthy societies are sustained. And if you'll remember, my thesis was religious conflict where the rubber meets the road in the Middle East, in China, believe it or not, and other places in the world are this level. Will our children be happy? Will we be able to keep our families together? Will they be saved in this world and the next? The theme of freedom and the encouragement of contests that allow loyalty and integrity to be tested and demonstrated will be a central one in the remainder of this speech and is a key principle in the peacemaking diplomacy efforts that I promote. For now, it is enough to assert that rather than a dichotomy of peace versus conflict, I believe we should seriously consider thinking in terms of peaceful conflict versus contentious conflict. The former is the type of conflict that is often achieved through sports and legal advocacy. In this type of conflict, opponents follow ground rules and conventions, and the result is positive societal benefits. The latter type, contentious, emerges when rules are absent or ignored, and when opponents fail to see and honor the integrity of the other. This second type of conflict is rightly eschewed, for it wastes human and economic resources and leads to resentment and deflation of the human spirit, if not violence. I mentioned earlier that our foundation adds the element of contestation to all forms of peacemaking. And I want to emphasize that contestation can be engaged only at the level of trust. If you are contesting too early, people will immediately read you as an enemy, not a trustworthy opponent, and things will go awry. So don't reverse these orders. And as Mormons would say, when the Spirit moves you that you're not ready for this yet, don't go there. Build more trust here. The term contest comes from the Latin term contestare, the roots of which combine to mean a coming together to bear witness or to testify. The courtroom is the classic place for contestation in which advocates of various particular perspectives aim to persuade others to see things the way they do. Judges and jurors listen respectfully to each other's testimony offered and are carefully considered when they've been heard, and they render a judgment. Persuasive contestation of this sort is one of the most respectful ways people can treat each other when they have conflicts. Each one is treated as an individual with a point of view that is worthy of being heard and weighed. Although the courtroom is an excellent example of contestation in the classic form, contestation in religious matters involves a few different elements that make it quite unique. Most issues being disputed in a courtroom can be weighed in terms of the facts and the strength of the evidence, or are matters that can be assigned a value in terms of damages that have been done to one party or the other. This is not the case with religious claims, which for believers are more than simply a question of facts or damages. That's why a sporting model doesn't work. They are about truth, and truth is not something you can compromise on. Management guru Peter Drucker recognized this fact, that some types of dispute can't be settled by compromise. Quote, economic conflict can be managed because economic interests are divisible, whereas ideological or religious beliefs are not. And while half a loaf is better than no bread, half a child, as Solomon long ago perceived, is no good at all. The same goes for religion. End quote. Furthermore, we have no common metric for judging between religious ultimates. For so much of what we hold to be the highest, truest, or best are based on subjective criteria such as our individual desires, our different temperaments, and, as Mormons would say, our personal revelations. One of the classic myths of ancient Greece illustrates the folly of trying to judge the most beautiful for everybody, and the tragic consequences that followed when a human being chose to measure that which even the god Zeus could not. You're familiar with the judgment of Paris. The background story for Western civilization's most violent founding epic, the Iliad, was a vicious fight in heaven based on anger over the question raised by irresolvable differences in a belief over the superlative. That was a dense sentence. Okay? Zeus said, I ain't going to make a decision between those three dames. Maybe that human being down there will be stupid enough to do it. And, of course, Paris did, and we know that it created the whole brouhaha between the gods that ended up coming down and continuing to feed the fight at Troy. So it went on and on and on until an entire civilization was destroyed. All because, why? Conflict was not invited to the marriage. The god Eris rolled an apple into the wedding of Aphrodite and, help me, the god who has a limp, begins with an H. Anyhow, who is it? Hephaestus, thank you. And on the apple said, to the most beautiful, right? It happened to land between Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena, and that's how the whole thing got started. If they could have invited Eris to that wedding, that apple would not have been rolled. Okay? They would have had to put up with her during the wedding, but perhaps it would have ended up in peaceful tension instead of a conflict that took down an entire civilization. You like my little riff on ancient Greek myths? Our religious claims are always tied explicitly to our own autobiographies. How we were socialized, what we were taught to value, the overarching themes and stories we were raised with, and which give us our sense of what existence means, our place within the world, and what we are tasked to do if we are to enjoy a happy life, and in some stories, a happy hereafter. Through these processes, we also develop allegiances and loyalties. Loyalties to our primary social groups, and in the case of those with theistic religions, loyalties especially to what God has revealed to us to be true and how we should act. These same personal and interpersonal dynamics also apply to those raised in non-theistic traditions, as well as those raised with no religion and with whose values are based in humanism and with reason and their interpretations of what empirical evidences indicate to them to be true and of highest value. You might find one of the big problems in the world today, certainly in the West, is humanists, which is, next to Pentecostalism, the fastest growing religious view in the world, are seen as not part of the interreligious dialogue. They need to be brought into the interreligious dialogue as respectful voices. Atheists can be respectful people of others, and you can respect them if they tell their story in a way. How did I become an atheist? It's an interesting story. Okay? So I emphasize that to a Mormon group. Do not shy away from your secular humanist friends. Make them part of your spiritual life and practice. Open to them your heart by opening your heart to them. And you'll find some amazing things can start happening. Your debates will not all be over, what happened before the Big Bang or whether there was a Big Bang. You'll have much more substantive discussions about how you can have some kind of ethical and spiritual foundation in your life as an atheist, and you'll find that they do. So that I can leave time for questions, I'm going to stop halfway through my talk. And since it's the Mormon group, I'm going to tell you one thing, and then we'll open to questions. How many of you have been missionaries for any church? Okay. Often missionaries who come into their work and believe in a universal divinity who cares for all people in the world have this problem. And they also believe that divinity can and does communicate to the hearts and minds of men. They have a problem. If they're speaking the truth that they know to be the truth to someone else, and that person disagrees with them, they put that person in a box. The box is stupid, either stupid, just doesn't get it, sorry, some later, in the millennium that person will get it, but right now it doesn't have the brain power to do it. Or duped, plenty of brain power, but it encrusted with the traditions of the fathers, so can't hear the words. That's Book of Mormon stuff. There are people, I'm not saying I'm probably all of these, but these are the things we put in our minds when we're talking with people. Doesn't agree with me about that, and I felt the Holy Ghost in the room, so that person must be stupid, duped, or, we'll get sophisticated, lazy. Had the witness of the Spirit, but, not going there. I like my sins, I like the way things are, so I'm just lazy. Okay, fourth, what's the hardcore one? Evil, yes. Okay, we got that person figured out, right? Or our testimony, felt the Spirit, didn't respond, check the box, and go on to the next door. What does this mean? Those old-fashioned missionaries here, dust off your feet, leave them in hell, and move on, right? There's precedent for this, by the way. I believe there are stupid, duped, lazy, and evil people in the world. I believe, however, like I said, I've probably been each of those. But when you get into a dialogue with somebody, or testimonial contestation, if you start with this model, that if they do not agree with you, they've got to fit one of these, are you going to have a respectful attitude for that person? You're not really interested in what they have to say. You're interested in that they are interested in what you have to say. Because you're there to proclaim, not to hear. You've got the truth. On to the next if they don't buy it. Well, as a Mormon, we would have to say, in every particular instance, you follow the Spirit, whatever it tells you to do. But I'm telling you, you come in predisposed in your brain with an attitude, if you're like me and my buddies, sisters and elders, with this attitude, and I want you to think about the fifth alternative. The unthinkable fifth alternative, that God hasn't told you everything. As it says in the Book of Mormon, there are sheep that are not of this fold. Right? I'm going to go see them too. And he told that to the Nephites. Right? My favorite scripture for you, go home and read it tonight. Alma 29. If you're looking for a theological basis for interreligious dialogue at the fifth level. Oh, that I were an angel and had the voice of a trump that could cry repentance unto the whole earth. That sounds like a righteous desire, doesn't it? What's the next line?
Yeah, I do sin in my wish.
I do sin in my wish. Oh, he's got it. Oh, hold it. Not fair. He has it. All right. But I sin in my wish. Why does he sin in his wish? Because he knows that a loving God has prepared for all men in all nations in their own language. I mean, he's rubbing it in their own language, sufficient to bring them back to him, but to follow the desires of their hearts. So we have this profound statement right within our sacred text that allows us to say, we don't know all of God's business. Maybe President Monson does, but he ain't telling. He ain't telling us as missionaries out there on the door. Okay? So we can go with the fifth alternative, which was, to say it bluntly, the Holy Ghost, I'm in a Mormon group, could be telling that person to stand pat. I want you to be the best Catholic possible. And if I messed you up by telling you Joseph Smith was a prophet right now, you'd be so full of conflict in your integrity that I don't know how I keep you in the Catholic Church. And that's what you need to do. So I didn't say that as doctrine. Randall Paul did not just say that as doctrine. I said it's a fifth alternative to put in your mind as another way of maybe handling the reason this person didn't respond to your testimony. When you felt the Holy Ghost there, you knew it was there. I can tell you in my experience in interreligious dialogue, and I'll end here, I have felt the Spirit many times in the room testifying for the love of that person has for me, not testifying the correctness of the content of their statement. And I started this, and I'll end this little spiel by saying, if we're going to have interreligious diplomacy, the difference between that and regular diplomacy is you will change hearts and minds at a social, psychological, and spiritual level when you feel another person loves you and cares for you. That's more important. Remember, Gottman didn't have to have any content. He could tell whether you're being real with each other. And I leave that with you today. And I'm now open for questions. And I would love to have anybody contact me. I'm going to put this up on the board because I love groups like this. We are in the early stages. We've only been up and running in a serious way for a couple of years. We had a great dialogue with many LDS students from UVU and some other schools, I think 2 from BYU, with Ahmadinejad 4 weeks ago. So it was really a cool event in New York. There were about 100 of us in the room, and we could talk about that. So we're rolling on different levels. The Iranian Gambit's one of them. But here, you can go to this website, www.fidweb.org, and you'll see my email address there. And if you're interested as Mormons, go to the FID organization, FID chapters, and go to the Mormon chapter, and you'll see there's really an illustrious group of Latter-day Saints who are now forming a chapter to do interreligious diplomacy. Their first conference is going to be down at University of Southern California this June. And, I didn't tell you this, but let me make it very clear. I might have. You got to be orthodox to do interreligious diplomacy. If you don't have credibility, if you don't have credibility with your own team, forget it. You're doing nothing. The other team knows that, and they discount you completely. Okay? So I'm not biased for or against people's positions. I'm just giving you this a very practical statement. So Mormons who are part of our chapter, they're card-carrying Mormons. Hint, hint. And there's a practical reason for that. We want card-carrying Buddhists. We want card-carrying Muslims, you see, to get into dialogue. That's the way they will influence their communities. I'm over. You've got about 4 minutes of questions. Yes.
Hi, Christina Southam. I'm a Latin American Studies major, and my question is, what do you recommend if you feel like you've been put in the box? If someone thinks that you're duped or that you're stupid or that you're lazy from their religious perspective, how do you approach that?
What's the next? I'm going to answer that question. Just throw the questions out so I can maybe. Did you have a question over here? I will answer your question, but go ahead.
How did you even get started in this? I've never heard of this concept before, or in any sort of a professional way. So how did you even get into this?
Get to that. That one is almost personal enough that I'll give you a better answer after I spiel. Okay. I will answer. Other questions? Okay. Maybe I'll have time to do that. The answer to your question. If you want to influence someone else, this is crucial. You've got to convince them that they can influence you. Let that sit. If you want to influence someone else, they have to be certain that they can influence you. Okay. You want to change someone's attitude about Mormonism, or you as a Mormon. How are you going to get to influence them? What we have found inevitably is you go to lunch and ask them how they came to their deepest beliefs, why they love their religion so much. You don't talk about Mormonism. But it's really awkward after they've given you their story for them to go, what's your story? And once that's happened, you're starting on your trip. Okay? What you're trying to do is build trust so that they come away. We say the successful prayer for the person who exits an interreligious dialogue is, God, why haven't you made the truth more clear to that beautiful, incredibly intelligent, good-hearted human? Force people to the fifth box and make it a matter of their personal religious practice. Really, a humble question. They can't figure you out. And that's where we want people to be, in that state where they're putting the judgment up there and effectively in their heart praying for the other person and no longer judging them in these such negative ways. Now, any other questions? We've got 30 seconds. I got into this because I'm 5'7.5". I have a Napoleon complex. I said, what is the most difficult problem in the world to solve? And there's a little bit of truth there. And as a social psychologist, I said, this to me, this is before 9/11. I said, the problem of interreligious conflict, where there are unmeasurable criteria, has to be one that will be perpetual. I came at it theologically from the war in heaven. The war in heaven made no sense to me. I went back to get a PhD at the University of Chicago, and it kept working on me. What could possibly be the conditions for a war in the presence of the most loving being in the universe, where there are no atheists, where everyone's free? What could be those conditions? And I worked on love and found that the contra love is not hate, but it's envy. Lucifer envied, couldn't take the hierarchical difference. I went back to my text, which is John Milton's Paradise Lost, and I worked through a lot of other things, and then ended up back in social psychology, realizing that people are stuck in hierarchies, and instead of fighting it, we need to embrace it with transparency and openness and come up with a new paradigm for peace and relations between religions where people are in inevitable, irresolvable conflict. Let us be in peaceful tension together, brothers and sisters. Thank you very much for your thoughts.